missing Gallo. I'd like to call to order the Monday, November 26th meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartzbacher.
Here.
Chair Rudnicki.
Here.
Commissioner Bolt.
Present.
Commissioner Breidenbaugh.
Here.
And we know that Commissioner Stallman will be arriving late tonight, and tonight we're missing Commissioners Almond and Miller and Reynolds. Thank you.
Wasn't going to help you there. Okay, you all have the agenda. There will be one change under general business, a postponement to extend the boundary of subdivision, of subdistrict, I should say, subdistrict 3 in the downtown area. Other than that, are there any other changes to the agenda? Seeing none. Next item, minutes to be approved.
Chair Rudnicki, just to clarify, we would like that postponed to the December 10th meeting.
So it'll be our next meeting in 2 weeks.
That's correct.
Okay. Minutes to be approved, ID number 18-409, minutes from November 12, 2018. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve, based on the recording secretary's certification, the November 12, 2018 action minutes for November 12, 2018 regular minutes of the Littleton Planning Commission.
Second.
A second, please vote. Oop. There we go. Okay,
The vote's unanimous and the motion carries.
thank you. Next item is public comment on items that are non-agenda related. You can also comment on general business or anything else. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. We expect the discourse to be civil. Please, if you're going to be speaking, please give your name, your address, or your district number, or how far away you live from where we are right now. When you have 30 seconds left out of your 3 minutes, our recording secretary will hold up a yellow card. There it is. And when your 3 minutes up or up, she'll hold up the red card. We have 2 people that have signed up officially. We'll start out with Howard Hanel.
Since I've been called, I'll speak. I was here on the agenda item that has been postponed. I'm a lawyer and I represent Bali Noor Investment, who is the owner of the property.
Could speak into the microphone a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So again, my name is Howard Hanel. I'm an attorney. I represent Bali Noor Investment, LLC, which is the owner of the property that is subject of the motion that has been to postpone. So I just wanted you to know that the owner is interested in this issue and asked me to be here on his behalf. But as I understand that the issue has now been postponed till December 10, I don't see any need to make any further comment.
We'll
So
see you on the 10th.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Next up is Sarah, can't read the last name.
Hi, my name is Sarah Kellner, and I'm an attorney for the developer of that same parcel, so I can wait until next week, and I will make sure to have better handwriting when I appear. It's Sarah Kellner, and I'm also an attorney. I represent Pure Strike, which is the developer of one of the parcel that is the subject of the resolution to extend the boundary of Subdistrict 3.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Pam Chadbourne.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here. I also was going to talk about the resolution, unsurprisingly, because I live a block from where it is. And I'm going to talk a couple things. I'm going to mention a couple things about it. The basic one is why. There's no good reason for this application or resolution. It's not in the Downtown Design Standards and Guidelines. It's not clear why this property needs to be included or why the Alexan property wasn't. For a long time, the definition of downtown has been described as the football between ACC and Riverfront, and the suggestion has been to go to where Alexion is. Why isn't that included? Well, it seems kind of clear that, as we just heard, there's a developer interested in this property, and all that our staff is looking at is, what can I do to serve this developer? Well, I can put this, or to have some conversation with them about. So I can try to put this in our downtown design standards and guidelines. That's pretty poor as a justification. And last time I spoke to Planning Commission about our change process, this is not adequate. What are the impacts of making this change? Again, I live a block from there. I want to know, what are the impacts on traffic? How does it, the CA district is kind of miserable. Maybe this gives us some ability to control what's developed there, but that should be written out in the staff proposal. Just waving our hands and saying, oh, well, let's just add this one property for no good reason is not enough. Planning Commission, I want you to ask more of staff. You don't have enough information to make this decision. It's appalling. And at City Council, at the last study session, the Tipton company talked about a community development process that apparently has been going on since February. I would suggest that part of our problem is with our staff not bringing the right information to us. And it seemed, though, that there was a lot of references to applicants and developers and that process. And darn it, I'm here to say, we, the citizens, are your customers. First and foremost, developers who come for applications, yes, they are a stakeholder, but we, the citizens, are your customers first, and we are your stakeholders. And the Tipton process didn't even address that. It's appalling. So we are your focus. Always demand, what is the impact on us, the citizens, the people who drive on the street, the people who are neighbors? That's what we need to know. And I don't have time to continue with my change evaluation stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak that hasn't signed up? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Again, under next item, general business, we're postponing the to extend the boundary of Subdistrict 3 in the downtown area. So we'll move on to our public hearings. PC Resolution 37, 2018, resolution to amend the Beaumar Estates Plan Development entitled the Beaumar Estates Development Plan, Lot 4, Block 1, Beaumar Estates Subdivision. Before we start, we'll go around the horn here like we normally do. Who has visited the site, and did you talk to anybody when you visited the site? Craig?
I have not visited the site.
I did not.
I visited the site. I did not talk to anybody.
I haven't been there.
I have driven into that cul-de-sac in the past out of curiosity, but I did not visit the site recently.
Okay. Thank you. Can we have our staff report, please?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners, Chair Rudnicki. My name is Robert Haig. I'll be representing the Community Development Department. The case before you, as you mentioned, is the Beaumar Estates Plan Development Amendment. In this amendment, the applicant is seeking to amend the Beaumar Estates Plan Development. This would be the second amendment to this existing plan development. The plan development was originally established in 1985, was subsequently amended in 1989. The original PD and the first amendment both include language that prohibits the further subdivision of this specific lot. The proposed amendment would remove that specific language that prohibits the division of this lot.
Could you hold on a second?
Absolutely.
We don't have anything down here. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Right, yeah, not a problem. So while considering this amendment, staff feels it's also important to consider what's not changing. So while this amendment would allow for the further subdivision of this specific property, it does not reduce the minimum lot size or any of the other minimum lot requirements for the overall PD or the subject property. So through my presentation, we'll cover the application and review the decision-making process. We'll go over the application details and the applicant's request. We will discuss staff's analysis and the following recommendation the staff is making based on the criteria in section 10-2-3 of the City Code. So for the process, the application has been reviewed for compliance with the City Code and the comprehensive plan. Staff is recommending approval of the application before you. The current step is the review by Planning Commission to formulate your recommendation, which will subsequently be forwarded on to City Council for their final decision and review. Following this decision, or that decision by City Council, if the applicant moves forward, the next step would be a subdivision process to divide the subject property and then building permits for any of the new single-family dwellings that might be built. All right, so the image on the right shows the subject property outlined in blue, also indicated by the arrow with the amendment area. This is Lot 4, Block 1 of the Bomar Estates subdivision. Outlined in purple and in brown is the remainder and the rest of the Bomar Estates planned development. Consists of six other lots. South of that is a separate PDR and is part of the Coventry subdivision. And surrounding the Bomar Estates planned development is R1 zoned. The subject property is 76,000 square feet. The minimum lot size for the PD as currently zoned is 19,000 square feet. The surrounding R1 zone district is 21,760 square feet, and the proposal would amend the PD and actually increase the minimum lot size to 20,037 square feet. What this would do would bring the minimum lot size in line with the maximum density that would be allowed, so rising the lower of those two standards in order not to create any reductions. If this subject property were divided evenly three ways, it'd be approximately 25,000 square feet, which would exceed the minimum lot size for the subject property, the PD, and the surrounding zone district. The code criteria and the Goddard neighborhood plan, as part of the comprehensive plan, direct staff and commission to maintain this single-family area and the character of the existing Goddard neighborhood. Staff finds that even though this would allow a subdivision of this property, because it wouldn't increase the density or allow for property to be developed in density that is more than the existing zone district and is about equivalent to the R1 zone district, that this doesn't result in a change in character. So this is just for demonstrative purposes only. It's a conceptual plan. The purpose of this plan is just to kind of show what the applicants their intentions were. It also helped staff and the applicant work together to develop some of these plan development standards, which have been included in this amendment. So this is a potential layout. As I said previously, the minimum lot size would be just over 20,000 square feet. The subject, or in this demonstration, applicant is showing that the lots could be divided to exceed that minimum lot size. Additionally, as part of staff's analysis, we looked at the square portion of each of the individual lots that's kind of above the narrower portion where the access drive is. Each of these square areas above does exceed 20,000 square feet. So what we were getting at by looking at that was proving that this kind of the narrower portion of the lot doesn't add the necessary square footage in order to meet the character of the surrounding area. The applicant is considering a shared access drive. Staff feels that if this drive were developed to current engineering standards, that would be required to serve 3 private lots, and that if this drive was determined to be maintained by the private property owners and were to exist in an easement, that this would be a suitable solution for the kind of narrow access point that all 3 of these lots would share. So one of the minimum lot size or the lot standards across the city zone district is a minimum lot width. Staff interprets this as a minimum lot frontage that's typically required. The Beaumar Estates PD doesn't have a minimum lot width in the PD. The applicant is proposing to establish a 16-foot wide minimum lot width, and so that there could be some option for providing individual accesses if that were ever to be needed. However, in order to provide access with the minimal amount of disturbance and additional access points off the cul-de-sac, again, they are proposing the access drive. This would all be part of a technical review that would be reviewed during the subdivision process. We would look at the contours and any of the infrastructure being proposed at that time. So the minimum lot requirements are outlined here in this table. I'll just kind of highlight the changes. In bold on the right-hand side in setbacks, the exterior side setback, so if I'll flip back to the previous slide, this would be the side setback that is the exterior of the planned development, so that's not shared as an internal, so this would be all of the R1 zoned properties surrounding. That lot line would be 15 feet. On the side, east or west, and then the rear would be on the north, that would be 20 feet. The proposal doesn't change any of the uses that are allowed. The PDR zone district only allows for residential uses and some institutional uses such as churches and those sorts of institutional uses. The proposed PD also includes language that limits the development on this property to single-family residential. This is consistent with the R1 zone as well as the existing PDR zoning. As we've previously discussed, the minimum lot size is actually increasing from the existing PDR zoning. And the minimum lot width, which was previously unestablished, will be established at 16 feet. So this image, again, further demonstrates how the subject property kind of is located within an area that is more densely developed. The proposal would result in density that is more closely consistent with the surrounding area in the R1 zone district. Again, the subject property is significantly larger, so it allows for that division without that increase in density. So some of the language that's being removed, and this again was in coordination with staff and the applicant. The original PD, which was done in 1985, included language that prohibited rubbish and certain antennas on dwellings and livestock and other office uses. When staff was reviewing this, we found that these are land use issues that are covered in other aspects or other areas of the code. And in order to streamline this zone district and kind of modernize it, we removed, or we worked with the applicant, and the applicant is removing this language and adding a reference to the R1 zone district, which basically states that anywhere that this PD is silent on a land use issue, it defers to the R1 zone district. This also allows, as the city updates zone districts and kind of modernizes the code, that this PD will follow suit and will, keep up with those changes that are being made. We are requiring language surrounding the easement and the access and how that is designed. And additionally, there's some language about the fencing that would restrict 6-foot privacy fences to be located no further south than any of the proposed or any of the resulting dwellings on the subject property. And again, this office use language that was removed, the PDR zone district doesn't allow for office uses in any case, and the R1 zone district allows for home occupations and things which might be considered part of an office use. So to kind of remove any confusion and clarify that, we've removed that language. However, just in the PDR zone district and the uses that are allowed in this amendment, office uses as a primary use are still not allowed, but you could have an office as a home occupation as long as you fit within those standards. So staff's review of the criteria found that maintaining the minimum lot requirements of the existing PD and that are similar to the surrounding R1 zone district help to establish those kind of boundaries and mitigate impacts that might occur across property lines. This helps support the public health, safety, and general welfare by allowing the more narrow or establishing a 16-foot wide frontage requirement. It allows for this kind of large roughly triangular piece of property to be used more efficiently and effectively. And generally find that this is not a significant increase to the intensity of the use on the property, or that's more intense than the surrounding area. Based on the findings in this presentation and in the staff recommendation, staff is recommending approval of the amendment to amend the Bomar Estates plan development. I'd be happy to answer any questions or return to any slides that you might have while you consider your recommendation. Thank you.
Questions of staff? Start here.
I'll go ahead and start. My first question is, I saw the public comments, a list of questions, but I didn't really see a summary of responses to those. I was wondering if there was any more information available from the public comments and the actual responses to them.
The public comments, was this part of the...
Part of the PC package.
Oh, no, unfortunately, we didn't respond to any of those, the public comments from the neighborhood meeting. The applicant who attended that meeting might be able to elaborate on that.
Okay, I'll wait till that. Would the 3 new lots that are going to be developed be subject to HOA agreement just among those 3 lots, those 3 new lots? Or would the entire PD, the other lots, be included in that as well?
So my understanding is that there's not an HOA in the PD, is that correct, overall? So there might be a PD or a homeowners association or some kind of agreement that would be established, maybe to maintain the easement or to maintain some of the other green areas in between. That would be up to the developer. It's also something that we would look at during the subdivision process. It's likely that there would be some kind of agreement established between the property owners, but it's not a requirement or anything from this plan development.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Okay. Do we know why it is how it is?
We do not. So I'm assuming you're talking about why Lot 4, Block 1 is so much larger than the rest
Correct.
of the properties. So we did research back into our records to see if we could find anything from the previous case files from 1985 or minutes from the hearings when this was approved. We weren't able to glean any helpful information as far as, why this lot existed in its current configuration. The property owner, the applicant, might be able to add some more of that elaboration. I know the property owner has been living there for quite some time. I assume it might have been the original home that was on this larger property and when the other lots were divided from it, but we don't have a clear answer.
All right. Do we know the average lot size of all the other lots? Are they that 0.43 acres, or are they larger?
They're approximately 19,000 square feet, I believe. I could look at the PD in just a second and get you that answer. But they're just below or just above the minimum lot size.
This shows 20,000.
And so I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to double check with you on the list of changes to the PD. There was. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's because it's split between 2 pages, but on page 6 and 7, it says that minimum land area to be covered by the structures is 2,000 or 1,600 square feet, and that's just, so it'd be, if it was a 2-story, it would be a 3,200 foot at minimum? 3,200-foot minimum house, is that how that works?
That's correct, and I think the way that I would read that also is that the upper floor could be smaller,
Sure.
but the footprint would need to be at least 1,600
Right.
square feet, and that's
That's a good
something
point.
we didn't change from the existing plan development. We just brought that straight over.
Okay. And do these changes affect all the lots in the PD or just the one?
They do not. These changes only affect Lot 4, Block 1, the Beaumar Estate subdivision, so just the subject property at the north end of the cul-de-sac.
Okay. And one other question. On the setbacks, can you describe to me the different setbacks and what they mean?
Yes.
What side north? Because there's rear is 20 feet, and that looks like that's on the north side. But you're saying that this side north is 5 feet. So I guess I'm just not following.
That's correct, and there is some, it's a common point of confusion. So the way that the City of Littleton's code reads is that if it's a north or a south subdivision, or south property line, has a different setback if it's a side yard. So it would only follow those side setbacks if it were determined to be a side yard. So if it's the rear lot line, as defined in the code, and there are more clear definitions in the Chapter 1 of the zoning ordinance that defines what's a side and what's a rear. So in this case, there probably won't be a north side within this lot or any possible configuration. However, because this is, we only have a conceptual drawing at this point, we can't say exactly how these lots might be configured. We left all of those standards in there. But the first step of looking to see what the setbacks would be is to say, is this a north, or is this a front, rear, or side yard setback or side property line? If it meets the definition for rear, then that's the setback that would follow. If it meets the definition of a side lot line, then we would look and see whether it's the north or the south or east or west to determine which setback would be required.
Okay.
That might not.
So this conceptual drawing here that shows 20 feet on the north and 10 feet on each side might be different.
And thank you for making a point of clarification. So on the drawing on the screen right now in the presentation, there is a correction. So the setbacks shown on the drawing in front of you here, not in the packet, this is different than what was in the packet, show the correct setback. So there's 15 feet on the far eastern end of the eastern lot. So that would be 15 since it's an exterior side. And then the far western lot, that western side would be 15 feet. And the rear, which is defined as being opposite of the front, would be the north property line across all three. So that north property line is the rear, that would be 20 feet. The exterior side property lines, again being exterior to this planned development, would be 15 feet. And the interior lot lines, or interior setbacks, would be as typically followed in the R1 or the rest of the PD. Should be either 10 or 5 feet, respectively.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Greg?
Sure. A few questions, Rob. First of all, there was mention that the original subdivision required a sidewalk along Bowles that wasn't built as part of that, and that there were also some other concerns about the conditions of the pavement and the cul-de-sac and so on. Would that be addressed at the subdivision process, and what would the city's ability to add those conditions, I guess, at subdivision be?
You're absolutely right. So that would be something we would review along with the Public Works Department during the subdivision process. I can't speak on their behalf and what their requirements are. I'm not exactly sure for when these certain improvements are required. Might be the case that because these lots are being subdivided and it fronts a right-of-way that those improvements might need to be installed. But they haven't conducted that review yet at this point. It would be somewhat preliminary, but you're absolutely right. We would look at that and assess those conditions at that time.
Okay, thank you. Second question, I think you addressed part of my question. It states that the exterior side yard setbacks would be 15 feet, and I saw 10 feet on the plan, so you addressed that already. But as those lots, as drawn in the conceptual plan, are shown, I think they back up to backyards of adjacent lots, and I'm concerned that maybe that should be a backyard setback or rear yard setback instead, which would be 20 feet. Did you consider that in the request? Or?
So we did look at that briefly. However, the way that setbacks are assessed across the rest of the city would be, only we would really look at the subject property when determining the setbacks. The definitions in the code don't look at the adjacent properties. So in order to be consistent with that, we didn't find any conflict here. That might have been some of the reason that the applicant elected to increase that setback slightly to 15 feet rather than what would be either 5 or 10, depending if it were the east or the west. But that is a consideration.
That too would also be addressed at subdivision in any case, right?
It could. This might be the more appropriate place to establish those larger setbacks because the PD does allow kind of for those types of considerations.
Okay. And my last question is the survey that was provided with the plan set shows what appear to be contours on it, but there's no labels on them, so I can't tell whether it's a hole or it's a mound. So I'd be concerned with subdivision of a lot like this, whether it would cause any drainage issues or concerns.
Absolutely. And a drainage study would be part of the subdivision application, and we would look at that to make sure that the any future development could be done in a way that wouldn't negatively impact any of the adjacent properties.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So when you were talking about the shared access, you described it as suitable. Would you define suitable?
I don't know if I could define suitable, but the language that the applicant included in this plan development amendment would allow staff and the Public Works Department to review the driveway with the common engineer or with the accepted engineering standards to make sure that the trips being generated from each of these dwelling units could be properly served by this access. We would also make sure to consider things as width for fire lane turnaround as indicated on the conceptual plan here, and that driveway was constructed strong enough for a fire apparatus to drive on it. Those would all be considerations during the review process. At that time, and because we have that next level of review, is why staff would accept this as a potential solution if it were the way the applicant decided to go.
So you'd have your checklist at that time?
That's correct, right? That's right.
Not subjective versus objective, okay.
That's correct.
You talked about some of the language removed is because it's in other parts of the code. Is it a one-for-one change, or is there actually some differences?
There might be some differences in just kind of the exact language as what was used, and I would have to look at it again in detail in front of me, whether it was, they used the word rubbish or, outdoor storage of, and burning and things like that, but those are things that are prohibited by other sections of the code. I wouldn't say that it's an exact one-for-one because the language in the code doesn't exactly reflect the language that was in this PD. But when we reviewed these, we made sure that each piece of language was properly or could be addressed by some other section of the code.
I was just curious, like when you talk about the antennas or the microwave not being able to be seen, so now that that's removed and other parts of the code are going to handle it, is it still not going to be seen?
So that is I don't think I could answer that. I don't think that particular issue would be handled in other sections of the code, aside from it not creating any negative impacts or not creating
Commissioner Schwarzenegger, if I could jump in on that. I think the changes made or the proposed changes to the PUD plan help staff enforce the code more consistently over this area than was previously shown in the PUD plan. So I think it'll make enforcement of the provisions a little bit easier than was previously shown. So that doesn't change the other lots, but as long as we're looking at a new PD amendment here, enforcement's part of our concern overall, and this proposed change will help us in that regard.
So you're saying it makes it easier for the city to enforce because it's similar to the other areas except for the other homes in this PD?
That's correct.
Because the other homes in this PD are not following under any of these changes?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll follow up on that. So basically, we have potentially 3 lots that have that are more in line with the R1. The other 6 lots are under the old PD, which doesn't seem to be quite fair in that concerning, say, for instance, business use. It looks like under the R1 you could have a home occupancy, as I do in my R1 area. The other 6 lots still can't have it. So it seems like you're segregating here, trying to align these 3 lots with an R1, but it's still in the PD. Explain the logic behind wanting to do this.
Sure. And if I might, Rob, so the PD as it is, right, there are certain standards that I don't think we've ever had any necessarily trouble with. I don't think there's any problem with enforcement out there as it is. But some of them are, I would say difficult to enforce the same way that you'd look at other properties. So this is an opportunity. It's certainly up to the commission. You could keep the old language if you wanted to, but now is a good time to take a look at maybe changing the language of the existing PD for these 3 lots that are going to be, and that may not even be 3 lots, it could be 2 in the future, who knows. But these new lots would be more consistent with the R1 district and easier to enforce in that way. I don't know if there's a particular reason why these initial PD requirements were made. But if there was and there was any objection to it, we could certainly revise the PD to go back to the requirements that apply to the other 6 lots. That's certainly at your discretion.
Okay. Is there any way that the front property line can be anything other than the south property lines of these 2 or 3 lots? That would be the south property line facing the cul-de-sac. Is there any way that the front property line could be interpreted any other way?
Not unless the right-of-way were to be extended further north for whatever reason.
I'm sorry, what could be extended? The road?
Correct.
Okay. So the front setback and the rear setback front will be on the south side, and the rear will be on the north side, correct?
As shown in this, yes. If the right-of-way remains where it is at the cul-de-sac here, that is the case, yes.
The only other just editorial comment is there's quite a few nice trees there. It sounds like the applicant is looking to save those, act as a screen. They're quite lovely. I would suggest they try to save as many as possible. Any other questions of staff? Thank you. Applicant, wish to make a presentation?
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission, my name is Mick Kittle with Plan West, and I represent Cale Wilhelm, the owner, who's also here tonight. I do not have a formal presentation, as Rob did a really great job being very thorough and detailed in the notes and, through our discussions since, I think, July or, earlier in the year, we went back and forth quite a bit to present tonight what we have as a potential PD amendment. I did want to comment, I know that there was a question on the neighborhood meeting, and there was a summary list that addressed some of, or didn't address, but mentioned some of the neighborhood comments and questions that folks had around the area. A few being, traffic on the cul-de-sac. I know in the staff report, it was mentioned that I believe 19 trips a day would be generated, and that doesn't qualify, I guess, as a significant amount of traffic to justify a new study. The side setbacks adjacent to the homes at 20 feet, again, the conceptual plan that we show you guys tonight is just an idea. It doesn't represent the houses as a footprint. It just shows the PD setbacks. In all honesty, if we put houses there, you have fire lane restriction, how far can they take the hose back? So, we're not looking to extend the full depth of the lot. We're just putting the opportunity for flexibility in the setbacks and not limit whoever may come and build, to just such a small area. And this was based on, as Rob said, adjacent PD homes and the adjacent R1 zoning. We're really trying to just fit with the community. If you look at the aerial, you'll see, this lot is massive compared to everything around, and we think subdividing would be an efficient use, which leads me to the history of the property. Just in conversation with the owner, and to my knowledge, the original home was built prior to the development. So the plan was created to preserve the home and put the lots around it as paintbrush court, as you see today. So that lot was actually created to fit the house. It's kind of tilted to the side and somewhat not in alignment with all the other homes on the property or surrounding properties. Some of the other questions, can we see other options for a layout such as moving the cul-de-sac? We did look at multiple options. Moving the cul-de-sac north actually took out the large swath of trees. There's lots of mature trees on the site. We really wanted to preserve that. And it also impacted the neighbors' property lines. So if you move the cul-de-sac north, the actual right-of-way would move into adjacent lots. So we just didn't see that as a feasible option. And to preserve the trees, the fire lane, idea you see as the concept is really what we came up as the best option to preserve trees, create a screen for any new homes that are built from the cul-de-sac, and also be able to safely get fire access to there. So if you guys have other questions, I'm happy to answer, and the owner is here as well if you have other questions for him.
Questions of the applicant?
I don't have any at the moment.
Bob? No? Any?
Alice, a few questions, I guess. Is the owner selling the property outright? Is he building on one of the lots?
I believe initially the owner was attempting to sell the property outright and had the idea of potentially building his own home on one of the lots. At this time, I don't know what the next step is as far as the owner's decision, but he does want to leave the option to be able to build and stay on the land himself as well. So,
okay. Do you know who provides utilities to the area?
Water is the Platte Canyon District, I believe, and power, I believe, might be, I don't know, Excel for power, yes.
Okay.
And we do have a civil engineer. We've had a look at the property. We've had a survey that shows, water access points, potential layouts. So if we move into the subdivision process, we'd be able to explore that more and get detailed designs and communication with all of the utility providers.
Right. Okay. And then one of the neighborhood comments that was listed in the package was about potentially repaving Paintbrush Court. Normally I don't really think about doing something outside of a development when, when we're looking at something like this, but there's definitely going to be, at least some more traffic there. I didn't go out there, but if it already is in poor shape, then that might be something that would need to be done at some point anyway.
And that's something we'll definitely work with Public Works on, in future processes to make sure we appease the city and get, everything in order that you guys are asking for and looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I guess that's it.
Okay, just a couple things. One of the community members mentioned possibility of an easement of one of the lots to connect to the cul-de-sac on South Lupine. I would assume you'd have to expropriate some land, the proper to existing house to the west in order to do that. So I assume that was a non-starter.
An existing easement that was an 8-foot pedestrian trail that, went.
I'm sorry, there is now, or?
There is, and it starts at the cul-de-sac and ends nowhere, and ends basically into somebody's backyard without the ability to continue and connect into any other further public access or trail system, street. So it's an easement that was created with the overall intent, in 1985, and there's just not an opportunity to connect that beyond the subject property.
Okay.
And if I may add, Chair Rudnicki, that easement and whether it be vacated or maintained would be something that would be addressed during the subdivision process as well. So it wouldn't be allowed just to kind of exist in its orphan state at this point.
Okay. Last question, the neighborhood comments section, there's a map with some property addresses in green. Are those the properties that responded or showed up to the meeting?
The map showed initially subject properties that were sent the invitation to the neighborhood meeting, and I believe there's a highlighted version that highlights people who did attend, and there's also an attendee list.
Those are the attendees.
So you can reference, correct.
Okay. And I would agree with your assessment. It looks like that house is definitely older than the, was it 1985 PD?
Yes, up into the home, it's
probably somewhere in the 50s or 50s.
Damage and.
So my guess is it was there, it had the lot, and they wanted to keep it, and maybe they owned the rest of the property too, and then subdivided it.
Subdivided it at that point and wanted to keep it as lot 4 for themselves. And
okay, that happens in a lot of some of the older neighborhoods. That happens quite a bit. Any other questions of the applicant? Thank you.
You.
We'll now open it up to public comment. We have a sign-up sheet. Speakers, if you haven't signed up, you'll still have a chance to speak after we go through our list. And we'll wait for that list to get down here. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. We expect everyone to be courteous, discourse to be civil. Please give your name, address, district number, or et cetera. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. When you have 30 seconds left, the yellow card will be held up again. When your 3 minutes are up, the red card will be held up. Lastly, please speak directly into the microphone, in that the acoustics in this room are pretty bad. We have 3 people that signed up. Jim Miller is first up. He does not favor the project and wishes to speak.
Good evening. My name's Jim Miller. I've lived adjacent immediately to the east of the project for 18 years. If you could kindly put up that map that was in the details. Not that map, the map that shows the properties that are around the property. No, the map, the other map, I'm sorry.
The first one.
The first one, right.
You already?
That one, okay. If we can just start at the beginning, in 1985, the development project was put forth, and it had certain covenants, which were the promises that the developer made at that time. There are two important promises that the developer made. Number one, that there would be no subdivision of any of the lots. And number two, first of all, actually, number one was that that big square up there would not be changed. Specifically, let's see, Lot 4 is existing and shall remain. That was coupled with the other promise, which is that no lot shall be subdivided. Now, why was that? Why was that important to get this project off the ground? It wasn't important to the people that ultimately moved into the subdivision because they weren't there. It was important to the people that lived around the subdivision because that's the Bomar South neighborhood. That is a very treed, child-oriented neighborhood built around 3 lakes where kids play in the street. It's a very undense neighborhood that has beautiful backyards, and it has covenants where you can't build a fence so that you can see the other folks' backyard and makes your yard look bigger. I know a little bit about this because when I went to purchase my property, I noticed that there was this big lot behind me, and I looked up these covenants, and I thought, oh, that's a good thing. The other thing that's important to realize is that, and I hope you all do go out there because there are mature trees out there, and there are some very nice old homes there to protect. And that way of life is important to us. That's why we all moved there. And that's why my neighbors have been there since before 1985. I'm a newcomer. But the leaving of the lot this way was an incentive for the people there not to object to the development that was about to thrust into the center of Bomar South. And that is well known to the developers in this instance. Am I out? Okay. I guess the final thing I'd say is there hasn't been any change, and the contemporary needs of the neighborhood under section 10-2-23 haven't changed. There's no legal basis for you to act in this case. Final, check those backyard setbacks, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Barker is in favor of the project, wishes to speak.
Hi, my name is Sharon Barker. I'm at 5838. If you want to put up the other one where it's on Paintbrush Court, it shows all the properties. So our house, my husband's in my house, not that one, the other drawing, that one. Our house actually sits to the west side and borders Kale's property. We've lived there for over 20 years and has seen that house ever since we've been there. We are in favor of having it go ahead and be developed. But I am also speaking for a neighbor of mine who lives across the street, 5838, and she can't be here because her family all has norovirus, and she is concerned about that driveway and the access. She has 2 small kids, and she is not in favor of having that be the access for the 3 homes. My husband and I realize there are some large trees in the middle there, but my husband and I are not opposed to some of those being taken down so that access could be more centrally down the middle of the road, if that would be possible. That's it.
Thank you. Next up is Gilbert Barker, is in favor of the project, does not wish to speak. Okay, that's everyone that's signed up. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this matter? Ben?
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here, but I talked to a friend of mine who lives in Beaumar South, and she brought up a couple of other things. I appreciate knowing about the original covenants, and I think that's important for the city to document and respect. However, I'm quite sure my friend would not agree with the statement or assessment by staff that it wouldn't change the character of the area. And again, the one that shows the neighbors, the 6 or 7 lots that are adjacent, they're totally impacted by whether this is one home with a lot of landscaping or 3 houses that might be kind of modern built and take up a lot of space in the modern fashion, not to mention losing the landscaping. So landscaping has a secondary impact maybe to humans, which is wildlife habitat. And it would change the character there because a lot like this gives an opportunity for animals to live that doesn't happen when you increase the number of homes. So, and even though that easement may not be used by humans, it's probably used or exploited by animals, and so that's a secondary consideration that I think the Planning Commission has missed in all of its planning discussions and which should always be present. What's the impact on the wildlife? Because we're pretty much killing everything around here. I've noticed the decline myself. Everybody else that I've talked to has, except for rabbits. And so you folks should be looking at the planning for that. Also, my friend's concern is that this is already up elevated, and that was already a concern of the neighbors. And to build 3 two-story homes there that would look down on the adjacent properties, not just drainage, but that certainly changes the character of the neighborhood. I can attest to that. If the 6 people, 7 people around there who are adjacent didn't buy their properties anticipating that, then you are impacting them. And I don't see that as a right that you have. You need to protect their rights, not change them. The office, you said, is a good point and probably ought to be looked at, and revising the PD to require the same kind of use as the original lots is probably a good thing. But from what I've heard, people are concerned about the traffic and the elevation and the adjacent lots, and I think Planning Commission needs to consider this. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? You need to come down if you're going to speak. Give your name and address, please.
Gilbert Barker, 5837 Paintbrush Court. We live obviously next to Kale, and just wanted to make a comment about the landscaping and the desire to retain trees and existing landscaping. All the trees currently are really centered towards the south end of the property and right next to the existing house. The back half of the property doesn't have any landscaping back adjacent to the neighbors. I would expect that a redevelopment probably would result in more current and more developed landscaping adjacent to those neighbors. So I think the desire not to remove existing landscaping is probably a little misplaced as far as most of those neighbors are concerned. In fact, we'd probably be the most impacted by it, and we are flexible with working with Kale and having adjustments made to those to the existing landscaping, the trees, et cetera. But that was really the only point I wanted to make, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion. Does the applicant wish to make any other comments?
Thanks again. Just as a response to the neighbors, being that landscape is a concern, we do understand that in the process there are landscape requirements with new developments, including single-family lots, which we don't just typically throw down. We put thought and consideration into all neighbors with the placement of shade trees, with screening trees, and the ability to keep everyone in conversation and very transparent in that process. So I just want to say that we are open, as we have been with the neighborhood meeting, and able to answer questions, work with the neighbors as much as we can, as well as the city and Public Works throughout the process. And also, the comment on, increased setbacks, again, we can look at increasing the east and the west setback. At this point, on the exterior, again, it's flexible. It's giving the opportunity to build amongst the lot, not necessarily restricting it to just a simple block area that you have to build. So if that's a conversation that you want to continue, we're open to that, and we will also discuss with the neighbors, just given that option as well. So.
One comment, and get your comment. One speaker mentioned perhaps moving the access road from the cul-de-sac into the development, which makes a little bit sense. It's quite tight to that property to the southeast. You'd have to take out, there's a couple of trees that are been hacked away to keep that drive open. Would you be amicable to perhaps moving that road a little further to the west than what you show on your very preliminary drawing?
Yes, I think we'd be open to that. Again, it does impact the most mature trees on the site, which is why we pushed as far as we could to be with the current driveway. The current driveway lies exactly where we put the fire lane, just we have to increase to meet fire code from, I believe, 14 feet to up to 20. So we did gain about 6 feet in width, but the idea was to maintain as much of the existing landscape as possible. With that said, we are open. It just requires also removing some of the more mature trees. And in early concepts, we looked at a loop, potentially creating a fire loop. We also looked at going up the center and doing a fire lane T, but the impact was just greater than we wanted to do on the site, so this was the least impactful option. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question, too. One of the comments they had made was to move the roundabout closer in so that you wouldn't have the road coming off. What was your thoughts or concerns with that?
As I spoke to earlier, when we looked at evaluating the cul-de-sac to move it further into the site, the impact to the adjacent properties of the right-of-way actually would impose onto their land, and it also wipes out all of the swath of trees that we have there. Mm-hmm. So it would be an impact with utilities, adjacent neighbors, as far as landscape, everything about what we show. And I think it actually clipped the corner of one of the homes to the east. The friend that commented on the drive being too close to the east home. So if you move it, the right-of-way impacts their actual home, not even the lot. So
thanks.
Okay, thank you. Before we go any further, let me introduce Bruce Stallman, who flew in this evening. And he assures me he's read all the material for tonight's hearing. And I checked with council, and as long as he's here before the vote, he can vote. So
I was going to ask. Perfect. Actually, can I ask a couple quick questions?
Since you arrived late, who do you want to ask, staff? Or?
Mainly staff.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think. So, and this may have already been covered, and my apologies, the flight we were on was intended to get us here so that I'd have been here at the start of the meeting, and it was late. Go figure. Never heard of such a thing. If this is to proceed, did anybody determine whether there are any drainage issues from building out this particular lot?
Commissioner Stallman, members of the commission, we would be addressing that in the subdivision process. One of the things that they would have to provide the city would be with the drainage report, and we would look at those factors in the subdivision process, primarily through the stormwater engineer and public works.
Perfect. Okay, great, thanks. Second question was, assuming the shared access is as represented in the presentation material, who's responsible for the maintenance of that? Is it the three properties? Again, this may have been covered already.
It's okay.
If I may, Pro Chair Tim, or Chair Pro Tim, excuse me. So the amendment to the PD, that document contains language that does require the easement and the drive to be maintained by the private property owners or an organization or some kind of agreement between them.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then lastly, I saw the comments, I didn't see anything that indicated Littleton Fire Rescue and/or South Metro had any issues with the configuration of this from an access perspective. I just wanted to confirm that was an accurate representation.
That is correct. The applicant consulted with Fire Protection District, the fire department, prior to submitting this application, and they indicated during this review that they would withhold any further more technical comments until the subdivision process.
Great, okay. Appreciate your indulgence, thank you.
Paintbrush Court, it is a public road, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, do we have a motion? Let's see. Are we all waiting for motion man here?
I'm trying to get there.
All right. I move to adopt Planning Commission Resolution 37-2018, recommending council approval of the amendment to the Bomar Estates Plan Development with no conditions.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Let's start down here.
I think that the proposed development is in line with other R1 properties in the neighborhood, Bomar South. The lot sizes are equivalent and would be in character with the surrounding neighborhood. But since that I'm a resident of Bomar South, I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Okay, we still have a quorum. David?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that, it seems that at least just looking at the lot sizes, not obviously, we don't know what's going to be built. And presuming that there will be no issues with drainage or utilities, which will come up in future approvals. It seems that the lots are actually, a little bigger than some of the ones surrounding. And typically houses are kind of pushed towards the front of the lot with a large backyard. So I think the impact to the north will be fairly minimal. And they're not really changing much in the PD. And so I think that it's, it seems that the lot that exists here today is kind of out of character for the area. So I think the subdivision will in some ways fit better in the area. And just given that the existing driveway of the property is where they're proposing to put the shared driveway, it all just seems to fit there. And as long as no other city departments have any issues with it, then I don't either.
Okay. Yeah, generally, I think the landowner here is pretty resourceful in recognizing the opportunity to be more consistent in terms of density within the area. I see certainly benefit to the landowner here in the potential to subdivide this. So I'm still struggling a little bit to see what the benefit is to the city and to the neighborhood specifically. So I would want to add some conditions to this in order to support this application. Should I propose an amendment at this point, or want to go
We'll
through the...
come back to you. Let's get through the rest of the comments, and then you can do your conditions.
I'm with Craig, and I'd like to hear what his conditions are when we go forward.
Bruce?
Yeah, I concur with my esteemed colleagues down the down the dais. It certainly seems consistent with the existing zoning in the area. I struggle to see how consistent setbacks and so forth and so on, mass and height and mass and so forth, would be out of place in the neighborhood. I'm intrigued to hear the conditions that'll be placed possibly on the amendment, or as amendments. Thank you.
One gentleman mentioned the covenant, and I always appreciate and respect covenants. However, the history of this property, in my mind, is the house was the original house, perhaps owned all the land. The land was subdivided. The only reason that large property to the north wasn't chopped up into R1 size lots is that it was existing and they wanted to, person was living there, wanted to stay there. I think the development is in character with the existing neighborhood. The mature trees will virtually hide all the homes from anywhere on Paintbrush. And for those reasons, we'll see what the conditions are. I would favor the development. Bruce, you had something else?
Just for the record, I am familiar with the property. I've been by it in the past. I did not, prior to this meeting, go by nor talk with anyone, but I am familiar with the parcel.
Great, fire away.
So, yeah, I'd like to introduce an additional amendment to add two conditions to the motion. The first is to increase the exterior setbacks to 20 feet as minimum as a rear yard setback would be in the R1 zoning district. The second would be to require the developer to, as part of the subdivision process, to make improvements to the community. I don't know exactly how to word this, but as deemed necessary by city staff, including resurfacing of the roadway, addition of sidewalks as appropriate for the benefit of this PD.
I will second. I'd like a little more explanation on this second condition.
Yes.
That's a little fuzzy
It was a
for
little
me.
bit roundabout.
Yeah.
To it.
Well, there were, as I mentioned, it was mentioned in the application or the neighborhood comments that there was originally a sidewalk proposed along Bowles. I think that would be a benefit to the neighborhood. I'm not sure if it physically could be built now. There's a big fence there. Steve, I think you have a...
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a couple of suggestions. One, we have two motions
Right.
which are not connected to each other. I would take the First Amendment, vote on it. The Second Amendment, I do have some legal concerns about,
Yes.
which I'll discuss after you deal with the First Amendment.
I have some concerns with the second one, so we're going to break them up and do two.
Should I restate the first one then?
So repeat the first one. By the way, I assume you're talking about 20-foot exterior side setback. Make sure you say exterior side setback, okay.
Yes, the motion is to increase the exterior side setback to 20 feet, which is consistent with the rear yard setbacks.
Okay, there's one. We need to vote on that,
You
correct?
need to vote on that motion first and
Right,
see what
and
happens.
go to the
with it.
second one, yes.
She needs to, do you
I'll
want
second.
Okay.
If we need to rescind.
All right. Any discussion? Seeing none, vote.
Whoops.
Okay.
That's 4-1 with Commissioner Breidenbaugh abstaining.
Okay.
That condition passes.
Okay. Number two.
Okay, so I'll start that motion over again. The second would be to require improvements to the larger cul-de-sac, including the frontage along Bowles, to include sidewalks or other improvements deemed necessary by staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I can certainly, from a legal standpoint, see the concept of improvements on paintbrush. The problem that I see for requiring improvements on bowls is this is clearly what the law would define as a takings. We're essentially requiring 3 lots to pay for improvements along bowls that benefit the entire community. And the United States Supreme Court has said you cannot, and as you have to have a reasonable nexus and a reasonable relationship between the land use action that's being undertaken and the requirement. There simply isn't, from a legal standpoint, a reasonable relationship between requiring these 3 lots pay for a sidewalk on a major arterial roadway. And so I would recommend that you not, from a legal standpoint, I think that motion is extremely, should it pass and be included, it's extremely problematic, and I would have to tell the same thing to the council. I don't think it passes either Colorado Constitution or Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution muster.
Ask a question regarding that. I understand that and I respect that opinion, but as part of a PD, wouldn't that be the reasonable nexus that you refer to? Because they're all these homes are part of the same PD and that's their frontage on the arterial. I'm just asking.
Well, what we'd be having is we'd be having 1 lot with 3 homes making improvements to a piece of sidewalk on Bowles that is used by a huge amount of the general public, and there's really not even a connection that the impacts of these 3 homes would change any of the impacts on Bowles whatsoever. And so that's my concern with it.
Okay. I'll withdraw that motion.
You withdraw the motion? Thank you.
The whole motion or just the sidewalk on Bowles? Because you had mentioned resurfacing paintbrush as well. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw the whole motion. I can't see a part of that wouldn't meet that test.
And normally, we would deal with the sidewalk in the subdivision process in any event. If we do have the right, as part of the subdivision process, if the Public Works Department determines a sidewalk is necessary, we can require that. So I think really that would be the most appropriate place to deal with that, is to let them bring in the subdivision plans, and then we can make an engineering judgment based on that.
Well, here's a legal question. It seems to me if we, and I know it's withdrawn, but it's just an interesting discussion. If we ask this developer, hold him hostage, in order to get this, he needs to repave a paintbrush, which is a city street. Doesn't seem to need to be quite fair. Again, it's holding him hostage to. Now I can see if he all the construction trucks, et cetera, does great damage after during construction, then maybe the city comes down on him. How do you feel about that?
I would be really concerned with that, one, because the city has a program of general pavement maintenance, particularly with the voters having passed Proposition 7A. We now are setting aside monies for regular pavement maintenance. Secondly, this really, again, interferes with the whole. One of the things we're trying to do in Public Works is to have a scheduled plan of street maintenance where we are maintaining streets on a consistent and regular basis. And again, I'm not the Public Works Director, but I would tell you it's very troublesome if we suddenly pull a street out, we move it way ahead, because it really sort of begins to create issues with that. The street may well need maintenance. We will certainly bring it to Mr. Reester's attention, but I would recommend that it actually should be done through the budget and street maintenance process that we use.
Okay, we passed the amendment, the condition. We're back to the main motion. Any other discussion? As amended. As amended. Any other comment? Please vote.
That vote's unanimous with the abstention of Commissioner Breidenbach, and the motion carries.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you. On to council. By the way, we are advisory to council. They have final say over this matter. Just let the public know. Anybody need a break, or you want to just continue?
Continue.
We will continue. Next item, PC Resolution 36-2018. PC Resolution to amend Title 10, Chapter 1, Subsection 8 of Littleton Zoning Code regarding the preliminary project plan process, otherwise known as P4. Could we have a staff report?
Yes, we do. Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, we do have a staff presentation and report. There was a report in your packet.
Yes.
It's a brief presentation. We do not have a PowerPoint for you this evening.
Okay, that's fine.
But there's three main things. Oh.
Omar.
It's the wrong one. So before you this evening, the subject of this ordinance, or future ordinance, would be to amend the P4 process to include rezoning applications. As you know, earlier this year in January, Council approved the creation of the P4 process. So currently that is an allowed process for anyone wanting to submit either a plan development or an amendment to a plan development, and that is a process that allows an applicant to submit a concept that would be presented by staff to Planning Commission and City Council for your informal and non-binding input. That is presented by staff, and the applicant can be in the audience if they wish to hear your input. Then an applicant may take that input to decide what and how they want to move forward with their potential projects. When we brought this for you in conversations with the City Attorney's Office, we felt that the best approach was to do it step by step. So the first step was to create P4 process, and it seemed logical to start with PDs. We found that to be very successful, and so the recommendation and request this evening is about adding the opportunity for anyone wanting to do a rezoning or an amendment, or a rezoning, and bring that through a P4 process. So the marked up code is adding the rezoning to this P4 process. So with that, Steve Kemp and I can take any questions.
I would just note, this is very consistent with what other Front Range cities do. In most Front Range cities, this is allowed for the entire zoning process. When this was brought to council, it was a pretty radical step, so to speak, for Littleton. So we suggested that we essentially do it for the PD district, and we would be coming back in a year and reporting back on how it worked. And as Jocelyn said, it has worked very well. It has, I think, a good example is the Evergreen project, where an early look at that project allowed the applicant to go back and rethink what they were doing and make changes before they filed an application versus having it come into the application process and have those issues resolved at that point. And so the process has been successful, and we'd like to recommend extending that tool throughout the whole rezoning process.
Any questions?
Seeing as this is an option of somebody submitting to staff, I don't have any concerns about it. It's just providing another option for developers to get some feedback. I just wonder, and I know it was approved as part of the original P4 process, but I just have a question for my own edification. It mentions that in the exception that these would come to Planning Commission in the exception where they go directly to council. Could you give me an example of when these types of applications would go directly to council without Planning Commission input?
Well, to date, no one has done that. All of the applications, and we've had 4 total, have gone to Planning Commission and City Council.
But there are scenarios where it would go or might go directly to council?
I think when we originally wrote that, and I'll let Steve speak to this, we were attempting to provide options for applicants. so far, the applicants that have selected to choose this process have felt there would be benefit to come to Planning Commission. So generally, we would expect that to continue moving forward.
The current code does allow a P4 to go to council, but the staff position has been, and the staff position I expect will continue to be, that we desire to come to both bodies. But occasionally you could have a situation where perhaps it's either very, very conceptual or there could be some other issues where the entity would want to go straight to council, but generally the position, and even the position that council has had, has been one of sort of an expectation, an informal expectation it's going to come here first and then to council. But I would not recommend requiring it, because then I think you create a situation where the one exception, you don't have a tool to deal with that exception. But I would tell you the staff position is going to be, as it's been so far with the P4, you go to the commission first, then the council.
And I would just add to that, generally the applicants have also wanted to do the same thing, so.
Thank you.
Are you contemplating any other additions in the future to the P4 process, or is this it?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, many cities do allow it for certain types of use permits. I don't think quite honestly, we need to get through the visioning, the comp plan. We're going to be someday down the road after the comp plan doing a major administrative amendment to the code where we really combine all the administrative stuff together and create a more functional process. That would be when we would look at a P4, whether it should apply to some of that.
Can maybe resurrect our use tables that we worked on about 2 years ago?
We have that, and in fact,
That would be part of the next piece, yes.
that would be part of it, and we use that as a reference. It was used as a reference for short-term rentals, and it's going to be used as a reference for recreational uses. So it is getting good juice, even though it may not get enacted in total until after the comp plan is done.
Accessory dwelling units too, Jocelyn?
Yes, that's on the list as well to talk about.
Inside joke. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. Oh, didn't see her.
No, that's okay. Just a comment. I mean, I think when we first contemplated this, questions were asked, about applying it to rezones, and per your feedback, you indicated you'd come back with that now, or you'd come back with it in the future. The future is now, and that's, I think, fills it's a good fill for a gap in the process that I think is beneficial for the community as well as the developers to basically get the feedback. And I agree with what Jocelyn indicated, is that, the preference is to come to both, and the developers see value in that, which makes sense to me. So I think it's well done. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion?
Is this a public hearing?
This is a public hearing. This is set for a public hearing.
Excuse me. Hello. Yes. Sorry about that. Open up public comment. We'd have a sign-up sheet. We have one person, Pam Chadburn.
So I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here, and the development in the downtown area is apparent, I think, to everyone who has to drive here. You can see the infill on the lots that have been approved, PDO, PD at a time. My comment about P4 is the same as it was. If we had staff and decision-making bodies who respected our code and our comprehensive plan, then the P4 is not necessary, because it equally protects rights of current owners and current occupants, who I would argue are more vested than applicants and developers who want to change and create differences in neighborhoods that are established. I don't understand why, there's certainly change, but I'm going to tell you we are not built out. There is something on every property, but it is not to maximum zoning. Being built out means that everything on the property has been infilled at least once or twice to maximum allowed zoning. You don't have to change zoning to get change in a city that's beneficial, and that respects the bones of the original design. And I think what offends me deeply is that there's never been a presentation that I've heard here in 8 years that looks at the bones of the original design and how the adjacent uses are set up and balanced against each other, and that they flow from one area to another and protect all these different areas that we have. The reason people love Littleton is because of this original adjacent use thoughtfulness, that the design created that. And you know, if they were all torn down and built one step up, we would still have that integrity of the zoning, which decision by decision I have seen shot full of holes with disrespect and a lack of consideration for the impact of those changes. So again, my comment about the change process is, you're not here to serve developers or applicants. You're here to understand the city that's being built and designed. We're in an infill phase, and that's fine. We're not the first, second, or thousandth in America to go through that in an expanding metro area. There's ways to do this well. I don't think we're doing that here. And this is one way to keep eroding and destroying the integrity of that original design. So, Planning Commission, I'm going to keep talking about this. There is design here. You're supposed to be people in a design field. You can see the design of the system. There is a system design in Littleton, and we keep destroying it piece by piece. So no, we need a better system-wide statement of our design, not continued ways to undercut it and destroy it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing no rush to the rostrum, we'll close the public comment portion. Now I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve and forward a favorable recommendation to City Council regarding PC Resolution 36-2018, amending Title 10 of the City Code to amend preliminary project plan for rezoning concepts.
We have a second?
Second.
We have our second. Discussion? Anyone?
I have nothing to add.
Well, well, go ahead. Does anybody else? I think that the P4 process, it potentially increases citizen involvement, and that they can, although they can't comment, that it's another step where the public can review proposed PDs, and in this case, zoning revisions. So in that respect, I think it's in the spirit of increasing public access to what's happening as far as development and rezoning in the city.
I guess I'll make a comment. I think also it allows, with, I can't remember, was that the development up on the hill, was that Broadmoor? What was the property that, before the current Broadstone, before the current Grove went up, we had that approval process, and they went through a lot of revisions, and I think this P4 process could help them, come to a better design that fit better with not only the neighborhood, but what the neighbors wanted, and they just didn't seem to understand that, or didn't want to understand, and just this kind of would give developers and people wanting zoning changes a chance to really understand what the character of Littleton is, and to help them along that process and give them more chance to revise their plans without spending a lot of money, without being so invested that they can't make any changes or enough changes to make it fit the character of the neighborhood. So I think it's a great process. I think it helps both citizens and developers and the city, and I'm glad that we're expanding it.
I agree. I think it's a good thing, and I think it gives the opportunity for the commission or the city council and the developer to have, it's not a conversation, but a look at what each side is thinking of, and in the process, it does allow the citizens to see what's also going on, and they can always make suggestions to their council member or us too if they want to in that process. So I think it's a good thing, and I appreciate your work on that.
And I agree with my colleagues. I think the intent here is, and I think this body's demonstrated, for example, a few weeks ago, we had the development over on Nevada that was asking for effectively a variance, and we felt that it was inconsistent with the surrounding neighborhoods, notwithstanding there were some large versions of similar projects down the block. So I think we consistently do our level best to try to balance the rights of the community and the desires of the community with the rights of the property owners. And if a property owner wants to rezone and ask for a rezone, then this is another tool to get the type of input to the developer that can benefit them in terms of melding with the community in a broader sense. And respectfully, I guess I would suggest as well that this particular tool isn't the one that would necessarily lay out the quote-unquote bones of the community. I view that as the comprehensive plan and the neighborhood plans as being paramount to what's desirable in areas of the community that then Planning Commission and City Council look at in terms of rendering decisions on requests that are made by property owners. So in that context, I think this is a tool that we need in the toolbox, and it's appropriate to have it. Thank you.
Yeah, I also would agree with everyone that has spoken. I've always been an enthusiastic proponent of the P4 process. I think it's a wonderful process. It allows input from us, lots of eyes looking at a project to improve the quality of design, the layout, the parking, the circulation, et cetera. So the projects can do nothing but improve after going through this process if they proceed with a formal presentation. As far as the public input, tell me if I'm wrong, Council. Public can talk to us all they want since there's no official application. They can politic and tell us what they think about the project before we go into a P4 meeting.
Absolutely, and the public can make the same approach to their elected representatives as well, because there is no application. And frankly, this allows the public to obtain a look-see at a potential project long before the public otherwise might see it, because the public, if you didn't have this process, would never see it until not only an application's been filed, but it actually comes to the commission. And a significant number of things can occur long before that happens. So this is actually enhancing the public's involvement over what would exist if it didn't wasn't in the code.
That's correct. The public would formally comment at the end of the process, right? That's one of the reasons that this was contemplated originally and why you and City Council wanted to move forward with this process. Also recognize that prior to a submittal, but after a P4, should someone choose that, it is a requirement that they do a neighborhood meeting. So that's the other piece where you must include your neighbors to discuss the concept.
There's plenty of public input. We've seen so many times where it's a fait accompli, where take it or leave it. Here's the official application, here's our presentation, and we have an hour and a half to vote on it. Sometimes we see good ones, sometimes we see bad ones, sometimes we see mediocre ones. This is a chance to improve the product that we look at, and quite frankly, they'll save everybody time, save the developer time, save the developer money wasted on consultants. It'll save our time, it'll save the public's time. So it's a very good process. Any other comments? Let us vote.
Motion carries unanimously.
Staff report?
We have no updates other than we hope you all had a nice Thanksgiving.
Is there anything else on the agenda for I think it's the 10th of December?
Yes, we'll be sending out the tentative calendar here soon, but yes.
Okay, no sneak previews, okay. Any commissioner comments? I have nothing. We have the official gavel now. We are adjourned.